It's the silence,
followed by the noise. It's the welcoming brew around the table.
and the pounding adrenaline of your first call out.
From a plume of water bursting from the ground,
to being soaked in sweat from the heat.
It's successfully planning an event at short notice, and the pride of pulling on a shirt for the first time.
Today, it's the panic on people's faces.
Tomorrow, it's the support from the communities we serve.
It's feeling anxious about starting a new role, only to be supported and inspired by amazing colleagues.
It's comforting families who've lost loved ones.
And heartfelt thanks from those we have saved.
It's the gravity of shutting down an unsafe business to turning around the lives of vulnerable people.
It's the driving grotto that makes Christmas that little bit brighter.
And the humour that gets you through stressful times.
From training that pushes you to your limits.
Making positive changes and challenging the status quo.
It's feeling excited, included and exhilarated.
Yet having the space to feel vulnerable and exhausted too.
It's the memories that stick with you for life, the good ones and the bad.
It's a great feeling, serving your community.
It's great to be part of something bigger than yourself.
And it's great that no day is the same.
It's all of these things that make us who we are.
It's all these things that make us Nottinghamshire Fire and Rescue Service.
This is me.
This is us.
And this is our story.
Proud to be rated good by HMIC FRS.
It's the silence,
followed by the noise. It's the welcoming brew around the table,
and the pounding adrenaline of your first call out.
From a plume of water bursting from the ground,
to being soaked in sweat from the heat.
It's successfully planning an event at short notice, and the pride of pulling on a shirt for the first time.
Today, it's the panic on people's faces.
Tomorrow, it's the support from the communities we serve.
It's feeling anxious about starting a new role, only to be supported and inspired by amazing colleagues.
It's comforting families who've lost loved ones.
And heartfelt thanks from those we have saved.
It's the gravity of shutting down an unsafe business to turning around the lives of vulnerable people.
It's the driving grotto that makes Christmas that little bit brighter.
And the humour that gets you through stressful times.
From training that pushes you to your limits.
Making positive changes and challenging the status quo.
It's feeling excited, included and exhilarated.
Yet having the space to feel vulnerable and exhausted too.
It's the memories that stick with you for life, the good ones and the bad.
It's a great feeling, serving your community.
It's great to be part of something bigger than yourself.
And it's great that no day is the same.
It's all of these things that make us who we are.
It's all these things that make us Nottinghamshire Fire and Rescue Service.
This is me.
This is
us. And this is our story.
We're live. Welcome everybody, Happy New Year's, a bit late. Getting there, we'll do for next year if not this year. Right, apologies for absence, please.
Chair, we've had apologies for Callum Bailey, who may yet turn up if possible.
That's okay then. Nobody else? No. Declarations of interest? None declared. And the minutes of the meeting, which is held on 13th of October, on page 3 to 12. So I move those. Second. Agreed. Okay, thank you. Let's move on again. Move on to item 3, which is the, item 4, Revenue, Capital and Prudential Code Monitoring Report to the 30th of November 2024. Just going to do that.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. So this is the budget monitoring report based on actuals up to the 30th of November and then forecasts for the remainder of the year. So the position is that we have again our forecast outturn is 51.7 million against the budget, revised budget of 52.9, which means we've got an underspend, a forecast underspend of £1.2 million. So that position's not significantly moved since last time we reported to you, which was back in October, based on the position at the August position. At that point, we were forecasting a £1.22 million forecast underspend. Obviously, within that, there's been some movements in where those underspends and overspends are occurring. So, as previously reported, a big area of underspend for us is on employee costs. So overall, we're now forecasting an £881,000 underspend on employee costs, and that's made up of whole time, on-call, non-uniform, and then other related employee costs as well, giving that overall position of the 881. So where that has moved from the previous report, because we're previously reporting 649k underspend on employees, where we've got an additional underspend since the previous report is mainly on the on-call pay. So we were previously presenting a smaller underspend than that. And where it's moved is in relation to training, in relation to on-call, and it's because they've changed the model of how they're doing the training, that they're doing what's called now safe to ride mode. So they move into, rather than being at SDCC and doing training, they're going out actually onto site and onto stations and carrying on the job training. So that made us an additional saving there in relation to that. In relation to other areas that have moved significantly or moved since last time, another area is third-party payments. So we're now projecting an overspend in relation to third-party payments, and that's in relation to joint fire control, and that is an historic issue of how the budget's been set. But then there's also a review going on in relation to how joint fire control is delivered. So that will be sort of where we are with that budget will be reviewed going forward anyway, in terms of what happens with that. The other area where we've got a movement in relation to the overspend is supplies and services. So the overspend in relation to supplies and services has gone up since we previously reported. A lot of that, if you read through the explanations, a lot of it is where we're having work completed, where we're using consultants, and it's in relation to work that fits in with that efficiency strategies and work streams around that. And that position is a managed position, so we have got reserves that we could draw down to fund those activities, and that was sort of the basis of where we were doing that work. Because overall we know we've got an underspend, we're then managing those costs against that underspend rather than drawing the reserves down. So because of that, it makes, in terms of that actual supplies and services line, it makes it look like it's overspent. But ultimately, if we drew the reserves down, it then makes your underspend go higher. Then at year end, I'd be asking or recommending that we moved more money back into the reserves to make them bolster them back up, so we could continue then with that efficiency work and that transformation work. Other income, you might note that has if you refer back to the previous report, it has moved down, but it's moved down because we've moved some of the income that we received, which was last time reported, which was 2 grants, so we've moved them into reserves, which we did ask for approval for. Obviously that then reflects that income has come down. Capital financing cost, there's been no change on that, so we previously talked about the reasons for that being underspent in terms of the MRP costs being underspent in relation to changes to the capital programme and changes then in the MRP, power behind the MRP policy, and then also in relation to interest payable. Ultimately, we've had an underspend in relation to, overachievement in relation, underspend in relation to interest payable based on capital slippage in the programme and not needing to take on the borrowing that we forecast we might need to in the year, because we've also had a grant come in that we're using to internally borrow against. Section on the efficiency savings on page 20, there's no change again on that since we previously reported. So we reported of some areas where slippage has been in relation to achieving those savings that we anticipated at the beginning of the year. We have then identified new savings that overall means against that 219k savings target we have achieved 230k. In relation to reserves are set out in table 3. So our forecast balances at the end of the year are 5.4 in relation to the earmarked reserves and just over 5 million in relation to the general fund reserve. And then on page 28 there's a more detailed summary of the reserves and the movements to and from reserves. So the areas where we are still utilising reserves are around the RMS replacement mobilising system, which again we've set that reserve up specifically to fund the project team associated with that, so we will be drawing that down to fund that, and also part of the transformation reserves being used to fund again the RMS part of the capital contribution towards that scheme, and then the movements to reserves are in relation to the grants that were approved as part of the previous monitoring report. In relation to capital, so the capital position at the moment is, the revised budget is £10.4 million. Our capital expenditure to date at the November was 2.2, and we were forecasting a 7.4 million spend by the end of the year, so a forecast variance of 2.9. The report then goes on to ask for some additional slippage to be approved, so 2.6, giving a net underspend then of 338,000. In relation to specific schemes where we've got slippage, the fire appliances, so there's some slippage there, additional slippage asked for there in relation to the stage payments that are happening. And in relation to the aerial ladder platform, we slipped an amount last time. We are asking for a small amount of that now to be brought back in again to fund the sort of part payments that we're making against that scheme. On equipment, there's slippage in relation to 50k in relation to coveralls, which are wildfire, PPE, and that's because that's a trial that's happening this year, and there's an additional amount being built in for next year. That slippage will then be added to fund the rollout of that in next year. Fire hood contaminants, again, that's been paused at the moment, so there's a request for that to be slipped, and it's been paused because there's a new standard coming in, so we didn't want to purchase the equipment and then it not be compliant with that standard, so we're waiting for that to come in. In relation to estates, on the access and inclusion, as we mentioned before previously, the contractor had gone into administration, so we're at the point where we've got to appoint a new contractor to complete that work, so there's some slippage on that scheme. In relation to the energy reduction and decarbonisation scheme, so this is where we had accepted a grant in terms of from Salix towards a scheme we were going to do at Highfields. Following the procurement process for that scheme came in at a higher value than we'd built into our contribution to be towards that scheme. So we have made the decision that we'll return that grant to Salix, and that scheme will not go ahead. The boiler will still be replaced and made a more energy efficient boiler, but the grant will be returned and the cost of that scheme will be a smaller amount, so there's some slippage in relation to that. and there's some underspending it, and the grant's going to be returned in relation to that one. In terms of ITC and communications, there's some slippage in relation to some replacement equipment, and then there's slippage in relation to a system upgrade that will actually complete and take place in 25-26. The work is starting in relation to that, but the cost actually won't be incurred to 25-26. And then in relation to the RMS scheme, there is an amount of slippage on that scheme that we're now asking for approval to slip that into next year, and that's due to the system being, the programme being based on staged payments. So obviously before each stage payment is undertaken, due diligence is taken, making sure that they've delivered, the contractor's delivered everything they need to deliver in relation to that payment being released. And once one payment released, obviously has a knock-on effect, so there is some slippage on the timing of those payments being made. In relation to prudential monitoring, so again there's nothing by exception to report in relation to that. Everything's within the targets that we've set. So I'm happy to take any questions on that report.
Thanks, Bev. We've got any questions?
Just a quick query on the estates. On page 23, you mentioned the current contractor got into administration, which is a step problem. It's not very helpful for us. I think we're not at risk. We've not put any money up front with them, for example, and lost anything as a result of that.
No, and we are making a claim, obviously, with the administrators in relation to the works outstanding in relation to the contract.
Yeah.
But we're obviously on the list of creditors in relation to that, but we are. But no, we've not paid anything up front to them or anything like that, no.
Okay, it's just the work that we're...
Yeah, we just obviously need the work completing. So the current repairs and maintenance contractors picking up some of the smaller works and the default works, but obviously there's 3 schemes, I think it is, because 4 that are in the scheme that need to still be completed, so we need a new contractor to complete those schemes.
More work.
Yeah.
Thank you. Just a little question to you for better understanding for me. On 2.5, section 2.5, employee costs. Looking at the figure, given the 740k understand on that is paid area, delayed recruits reports and higher vacancies. My question is, how does this service plan to address these staffing gaps to ensure operational efficiency and staff well-being? Can I ask my second question?
Yeah.
On the 2.6 section, with the upcoming 33% to 50% increase in retaining fees from January 2025, has there been any assessment of how this will impact on the on-call budget for 25-26? And are there plans for the mitigating financial pressure?
If I answer your second question first, so in relation to the changes to on-call, yeah, that has been built into the budget for 25-26. So it is an additional pressure on the budget. It's being managed as part of the overall budget position in relation to that. In terms of your first question,
I can give a little bit. That's okay, Chair. Yeah. In terms of, just to really add on to what Beth said about in terms of the on-call budget, the on-call budget is very much driven by incident demands. That's one element of it. So it's relatively good news. You have lesser incidents, you pay people that lesser amount in terms of because we pay for their time. So there is benefits there. And I don't know if members recall, but we are implementing the national agreed position in terms of retaining fee, which has been built into next year's budget, which has seen almost a tiered approach for the number of hours that you give for an on-call firefighter. So that will see a significant change in terms of that retaining fee. So there is a potential for some fluctuation in even next year's budget while that new employment or negotiated position it takes time to level out. With regards to the on-call, so the whole time pay in terms of 2.5, we have consciously approached the management of vacancies on the basis that we still struggle, or we still have the challenges of having a 1-year settlement. And having the 1 year settlement does present us a number of challenges in terms of that budget planning. So we took a very conscious approach in terms of managing the numbers rather than feeling that we'd get into a position where we would recruit more people to make up the establishment, and then potentially on a 1 year settlement we'd be left with a budget deficit, and that would minimise our flexibility and our solutions to be able to respond to that. We are very much aware of, in terms of the budget consultation, they have talked about a multi-year settlement that would significantly help us in terms of that planning of the establishment and that managing it over a period of time, because I'm sure councillors are aware that to actually onboard a firefighter into a vacancy position, it takes a good number of months to be able to first recruit them, then train them. So it's not a very responsive system, so there's certainly improvements to make there. And then lastly, in terms of the underspend, much of that was as a result of our budget assumptions on the pay rise, and the pay rise actually becoming lower than the anticipated or the budgeted position. So that has resulted in quite significant underspend.
Great. Anybody else? No one else indicating, so we're asked to note the contents of the report, approve the slippage and acceleration of the capital programme, and approve the forecasted capital programme. So I'll move that. Seconded. Do we agree? We agree. Thank you. Moving on to item 5, which is budget proposals 25-26.
Thank you. This report is to enable members to consider the council tax options and then recommend an option to fire authority for acceptance. So the MTFS and the budget guidance were approved at fire authority on the 13th of December, and that would show that we'd got a deficit and would be difficult to set a balanced budget without the use of reserves. At the time of writing the MTFS report, it was forecast that we have a £1.248 million deficit in 25-26 if a 2.95% increase in council tax was approved, and a 471k deficit if a £5 increase in council tax was approved. Since the MTFS was written, we've now received the provisional local government settlement. There's not been any material movement basically in his funding assumptions in relation to that as a result of the provisional local government funding settlement, mainly because we had a policy statement in November, and obviously that outlined the intentions really in the provisional settlement, so that was built into that MTFS position, so a lot of that was taken into account. So table 1 does show you the changes in funding, because there has been a little bit of movement, which is mainly around sort of the inflation rates that are applied in relation to business rates and the RSG. So there's an increase of £9,000 in relation to our funding as a result of the provisional settlement. What the provisional settlement did do, it confirmed, well, we're not going to receive anything in terms of the recovery grant that's been announced as part of this year's settlement. The fire authorities have not been included within that. And previously I'd not built anything in for that, but we've noted that we might get a small amount from that. And the other area where we're still really waiting, well, we are waiting for more confirmation and more information, is the employees' national insurance contributions. So in relation to where we were, I'd previously noted that the statements say that we will get funding for it, and it will be direct costs that are funded only. The level of funding around that is obviously uncertain. At the time of writing the MTFS, I'd built in about 90% of funding. Following the provisional statement, they have now announced a methodology. Although they've not announced the applications, they've announced a methodology, and using that methodology, and fire authorities have been put in the pot with councils, it looks like we'll only get about 30% of our funding at the moment. So of our 700k cost of that, it looks like we're going to receive about 200k funding. So that has increased the gap. And all of these things, yesterday was the deadline for, the day before was the deadline for the responses on the consultation in relation to provisional settlement. So these are things that we've highlighted in response to them in terms of the impact of the NI changes, the fact that we've not got the recovery grant, so that's all been fed back to NHCLG. In terms of the revenue budget for 2005-06, and then that's the MTFP period going to 2008-09, 2.7 onwards highlight some of the assumptions that have been made in relation to the various elements or the bigger elements of our budget. So in relation to the pay award, we're currently assuming a 2% pay award in relation to the uniformed pay, and that's in line with national sort of guidance in relation to that assumption. In relation to support staff, we've built in a 3% pay award, which is aligned with the flat increase that was given last year. So at the moment there's no sort of further indication in relation to that. Employees' national insurance contribution, so I've obviously just talked about that in terms of what the impact of that is on us in terms of its cost is 700k to us, and we're expecting about 200k funding in relation to it at the moment. One of the areas we've looked at as part of the budget development is the whole time pay. So currently we've always budgeted at full establishment, but there is development rates of pay within the establishment. So we've now budgeted to take that into account, so that has identified and enabled to reduce that budget by £456,000. So that does mean that that's part of going back to why we've got an underspend on whole time pay in this current year. That's sort of part of that reason. So we've now remove that going forward. On-call pay banding, so again we've just talked about that in relation to the year changes, so that has had an increase the budget in relation to that. Non-uniform vacancy factor, so we have reduced the vacancy factor down from 10% to currently 8.5%, because again sort of this year's forecast is below the 10%, so we wouldn't achieve that, so we've reduced that down. Energy costs, so again we've looked at our energy costs and we've reduced both the budgets in relation to gas and electric. So obviously historically it's been quite a volatile area, and again if you go back to the budget monitoring report, it's an area where we're underspending against the budgets, so we've realigned the budgets to our usage and our actual cost at the moment, then built in obviously inflation costs going forward. So again that has released and reduced some of the budgets in relation to that. In relation to pensions, obviously aware of the remedy legislation that we're implementing, and in relation to that we've got earmarked reserves set aside for that, and most of that is being funded. Implication to that is in the main funded by central government, but we have got an earmarked reserve to mitigate against anything internally that might arise from that. And in relation to one of the risks I suppose to highlight in relation to the budget at the moment is a pensions grant. One got rolled into RSG last year, so that's remained in RSG and we've received the inflationary uplift in relation to that. But one's a standalone pensions grant, and yet we've not had confirmation it will be received again. The assumption is that it will be received and it will remain at the same cash terms as last year, but we are still waiting for confirmation of that. The MRP has obviously been aligned with the capital programme. So how MRP works, it's the capital programme and the capital spend that's funded by borrowing in this year that'll impact on the MRP charges for next year. So there is potentially that will, if there's more slippage on the programme as we go forward in 24-25, that'll obviously have an impact on that budget again next year. Interest payable and interest receivable, so again going back to the budget monitoring report, they're both areas where we've got an underspend in relation to interest payable and we're overachieving our interest receivable, so that's now been reflected in the budgets, so that's obviously brought the budget requirement down. In relation to going back to the pay award, so we have built in now a corporate contingency that does allow for an increase or would be available therefore to support if the pay award was above the level that was built into. If it was got settled at above the 2%, that is there to allow for another 1% in terms of the pay award. In relation to council tax, so the current assumption in relation to the council tax base is that it increased at 1.35% based on last year. But at the moment that's still the assumption that's been built in, so that was in the MTFS update in December, and that's still the assumption at this point in time, and we'll get that confirmed, the actual council tax basis, towards the end of this month. So I've not got that information yet, I'm starting to get them through. In relation to, again, surplus and deficit on council tax, the authority have just passed me that information through. I'm just finalising that position. At the moment we've forecast a neutral position, and the indicator I've got at the moment is that it will move from that. There won't be a significant surplus or deficit. It will. Some are in surplus, some are in deficit, but obviously cancelling each other out. So I don't think that will move the position. Obviously business rates, again that comes through from the districts and city council at the end of the month in relation to them doing their business rates return, and then that passes on to us to give us that information, and we'll feed that through into the budget position that goes to Fire Authority in February. So coming on to the sections around the options for council tax. So the options that have been looked at are a council tax freeze over that MTFP period, a 2.95% increase in council tax over the MTFP period, and then the £5 council tax flexibility being taken in 25-26, and then the 2.95 in the years after that. So at the moment the £5 flexibility has been it's been confirmed. It was confirmed in the policy statement, and it's again confirmed in the local in the provisional settlement, but it is only been confirmed for 25-26. Again, one of the asks in the response back to the provisional settlement is that they consider giving us certainty on that we've got that for the future years, but at the moment we haven't got that. 2.41 identifies the key assumptions that have been made in relation to the positions that are set out in the tables, but they're aligned with the items we've just gone through in detail, so I won't go through all of those again. So in relation to table 2, that shows you the deficit position if we had no council tax increase. So that shows that we'd have a gap of £2.5 million next year, and then over that MTF period, by the time we get to 28-29, that would be a £6.6 million gap. Table 3 then shows you the impact of a 2.95% council tax increase. So that's a £1.6 million gap for next year, and then rising to peak at 27-28 at £3 million. And then table 4 shows you the impact of the £5 council tax precept in 25-26. So that obviously reduces that deficit down to £887,000, and again peaking then to just over £2 million in 27-28. So in terms of the budget options, we've obviously got to legally set a balanced budget by 25-26. So to do that, we'll obviously need to build in some savings and the income from the council tax and use of some of the reserves potentially to balance the budget. The council tax increase of £5 raises an additional 777k additional funding compared to the 2.95% council tax increase. And one of the key considerations there is that we don't just receive it obviously in 25-26, it's then in your base going forward, so we benefit from that level of additional income in each of the years going forward. We do hold £1.1 million of earmarked reserves that are set aside for budget pressures, but that wouldn't be enough to cover the deficit in terms of the council tax was frozen or if it was increased by 2.95%. Both options would require significant savings to be made. For a Band D household, a £5 increase would see the council tax rise to £97.21p per annum. and then there's a table setting out the differences in terms of the impact on the council tax, different bands in terms of the 2.95% increase and the £5 increase. So at 2.54 sets out that it was Fire Authority had recommended that Finance and Resources Committee work within the guidance for then feedback to Fire Authority in February their options for council tax in terms of whether they accept the 2.95 or accept the £5 increase in the additional flexibility of the £5 and any options for addressing the budget deficit going forward. Table 6 just gives you a summary of the budget shortfalls based on the 0%, 2.9 and the 5% council tax increase. So moving on now to cover a little bit about the capital programme in terms of that medium-term financial plan from 25-26 to 28-29. There is a copy of what the programme looks like in Appendix C. And it's in line with the 10-year programme, the indicative programme that was presented to Fire Authority in December as part of the MTFS update and approval of the MTFS. So the major schemes for 25-26 are the aerial ladder platform appliances that's obviously commenced in this year, the Stockhill Fire Station build and the replacement mobilising system. 2 areas were added to the capital programme as part of that MTFS report. Well, the access and inclusion programme was increased because of the issue with the contractor. So there was an additional budget provided for in 25-26 to allow that scheme to complete, and an access and control system replacement has been built in. So that's how we get access into all the fire stations. So that's been built in. So again, happy to take any questions on any of that report.
No, it's depressing, isn't it? Who said it was going to get better? I'll strangle them. So we've got no option really, have we, but to go for the £5. That's the maximum, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the maximum.
You agree? Richard?
Just one quick query, just clarification really, on 2.51 where we're saying that if we do go for the £5 rise for 25-26, it remains in the base and provides security of funding for future years. So just, I know I should know this, but when you say remains in the base, what does that mean that this time next year we'll be talking about are we sort of making an assumption of what we might be discussing this time next year?
No, it means that it's not one-off funding. If you don't take it, you've got that loss in next year as well. Because once it's in, obviously we gain that money. It's still in that it's still in the base. It rolls forward and it's there for next year. So your increase that you apply next year's based on that higher rate of having the £5 increase in or the 2.95 increase in. Whereas if you don't, if you go with a lower amount, your base to start with is lower.
Okay, that's clear. I thought it was, I just wanted to be sure.
Yeah, it stays in there.
Yeah.
Any more? Anwar? Okay. We agree? £5?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Reluctantly,
well, it's just, I'm saying, same set of people down in Whitehall, isn't it, doing it? Right, move on to 6 then, which is again updated final audited statement of accounts.
Do you want to provide a view on the pay award assumptions for the final
that other recommendation, so there's another recommendation here. So that's page 45. Need to agree with that. Okay.
Provide a view on the pay award assumptions.
Comments? Okay.
Yes.
Agree.
Any
points on it? Any points we should be making a note on that?
No, I mean, like we have built the contingencies there as a backup, and we obviously consider that when we look at the level of reserves as well. It's one of the things in the risk assessment we do of reserves. We build in and take into account what an increase in that pay award would have. So it is, you know, ultimately we would have to go into reserves if it comes in higher than the budget for, but we have built that, you know, we have built that into that assessment.
So what's it like on the front line then? Because they're all quiet, or everybody going
to? I think there is one of the significant unknown factors at the minute is at a national level. There's just been a change in the General Secretary of the FBU. So there is a change in leadership. And this is only very recently, which is last week. The FBU have already written to the NJC, the pay award body, stating their concerns and for immediate consultation. But at the same time, from the network that Bev's involved in, most authorities will working on the assumption of the 2%. But I think it's very prudent in terms of Bev's suggestion of building that extra additional 1% in as a reserve.
Cushion.
Yeah, I think it's very prudent.
Yeah, I think so.
It's better we can do it.
Because it's the known unknowns, isn't it?
Yeah.
You can never assume about anything, but the indication.
Well, I was thinking train drivers got a decent rise, and now they've gone on strike.
And that's a really valid point, Councillor, because we have been, Bev and the Chief Officer have just responded to a consultation from the LGA regarding the pay rise, and their starting point is affordability, which is disappointing. From the point, you know, their starting point is affordability. So if they take that into consideration, they will look at affordability and other sectors that have made potentially significant pay rises.
So to answer that, we've just got to agree it.
Yeah, pick 3.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Moving on again to update final audited statement of accounts.
Yeah, so this report is to give an update on the previous report that came in October about backstop dates in relation to 21, 22, 23 accounts. So that report had asked for delegated authority for myself and the chair to sign those accounts and to accept the audit completion report. So the report has got the audit completion report enclosed as Appendix A. And just to update you on sort of the activities that took place to enable that to happen, we accepted the final statement of accounts on the 5th of December, and they were signed by both myself and the chair. The audit opinion was then received on the 10th of December, and that gets included then within that statement of accounts, and we've published the statement of accounts then on the 12th of December. So that means we can hit that statutory backstop date on the 13th of December. There were no changes to the final published statement of accounts for 21-22, so they were as presented to the Finance and Resources Committee in October 22. There were some changes in relation to the 22-23 accounts, and they're listed in relation to the changes, but they were all technical adjustments and didn't have any impact on the overall underspend for that year. In relation to the opinion that EY have then given in relation to the accounts for both 22 and 31st of March 22 and 31st of March 23, they give a disclaimed opinion, and their basis for the disclaimed opinion is then set out in 2.5. So it's mainly relates to the fact that this Act came in, the Accounts and Audit Regulations Act 2024 came in, which is put the backstop date in of the 13th of December for them to have finalised their audit. So in relation to that meant they've not been able to obtain sufficient and appropriate audit evidence to provide a basis of an opinion, as they've got insufficient resources and time available to perform that necessary work. So that was as I expected, and as previously reported in relation to that disclaimed opinion. And then 2.6 just sets out and confirms the report that was previously presented to Fire Authority on the 26th of July that gave the value for money opinion. So there's no change to that. It concluded that there was no significant weaknesses in our arrangements. So the report confirms that. So again, I'm happy to take any questions on that. Obviously the full report is there. But it's just to give an update on that backstop arrangement.
Yeah, anybody? No questions? We're just asked to note on both those items, final audited statements and their final audit completion report. I'll move that. Seconded. Agreed. Okay, moving on to 7, audited statement of accounts.
Yeah, sorry. So this is to present the actual statement of accounts for 23-24. So the actual accounts are there in full as an appendix. This is the first time these are being presented to committee. So these are the audited accounts rather than the draft accounts were published on the website by the deadline of the 31st of May 2024, and they were provided to the auditors by that statutory deadline. We didn't bring them as the draft to F&R at that point due to the removal of the committee meeting in June. That didn't go ahead, so we're giving them now as the audited account. So in relation to obviously the makeup of the accounts, it's made up of the movement in reserves, the comprehensive income and expenditure statement, the balance sheet and the cash flow. So an important thing to note is that they include a lot of technical adjustments and accounting adjustments. So the key thing to note, or the most important part of that, probably, or the easiest bit to look at as a member, is probably the narrative statement that then links it through to the outturn report. And the key point is that they both tie back and that overall position in terms of the net underspend for the year. So that's set out in 2.2 in relation to, it was 122 and it made the general reserve balance 5.1, and in relation to the earmarked reserves there was an increase in those of just over £500,000, bringing them to 5.9 million, and both of those figures will then tie, you can see them in the statement of accounts in terms of that movement in reserve statement, and they tie back to that outturn report that was presented. So I'm not proposing really to go through the detail in the statement of accounts. If anybody does want to go through that, to go through the accounts, I'm quite happy to have a meeting outside of the committee meeting to take you through the detail of them. But the recommendation is to note the auditor's statement of accounts and give me delegated authority, again with the chair of the committee, to accept them if there are any changes, any further changes, we'd obviously report them back to committee. It's not really anticipated there will be any changes, any further changes.
There's nothing jumping off the pages.
Sorry? Nothing
jumping off the pages.
No, we have made, I mean, the next report obviously which is going to take you through is the audit of the accounts anyway, so they'll go through the findings from the audit.
Are there no questions?
Chair, could just say it's in the cover page, but it's not in the actual recommendations, but you're happy to accept the recommendations to delegate authority?
Yeah. Agreed.
Chair of Finance.
Is that it? Okay. Move.
Just an observation, really. It's not, I'm not going to go through it, don't worry. But I had to smile at paragraph 2.8, which explains to us it's a very good idea to read the statement, the context of the accounts, because actually it is very informative. I mean, I know there's a lot to it, because at the end of the day, there's a heck of a lot of information here that with the best will in the world, most of us can't really take it. But have the well, it's not just a summary; it's a very detailed report. It is actually very helpful. So yeah, and I would imagine that's probably standard practice anyway. But this isn't particularly useful.
Yeah, I think that's the area to concentrate on, that narrative report.
Okay, so what's a draft audit completion report? Just do that.
Yep. To Richard then?
Richard's doing it, is it? Sorry, Richard.
Thank you, Chair. So just on the narrative report, it's what I always get my first year trainees to read first. So if they're working on an audit, read that first. It will tell you everything you need to know about this entity. It's a really good, you can read it in about 20 minutes and you can get to know everything there is about that people that you're auditing. So it's a really good summary. So that's true for any public entity if you're working with different places as well. Typically in their published annual accounts, it'll be a really good summary for the year in the first bit. But so I just thought I'd step back before I dive into the detail of the paper, and there's quite a lot there, so I'll kind of take you through the headlines of it. But you've just had the item before, the closure reports for 22-23 and 21-22. So the logic of that means that the last detailed audit report you got to this committee was 2021, which probably would have come in about October, November 21. So that's a long time ago. So I'm conscious that that's the kind of context that we're working in terms of the audit. And so the detail in the paper that we've got here and all the kind of jargon about backstops and disclaimers is basically all of that is just the kind of legal and accounting construct that the industry and the politicians and the kind of sector leaders have all come through to allow auditors to comply with audit standards, allow accountants to comply with accounting rules, to try and get out of the situation that the sector has found itself in, where you're not receiving a detailed audit report for 3 or 4 years. And you're not alone in that position. There's quite a lot of local authorities, unfortunately, that have had things that have kind of taken that long to get sorted. So the paper that's just come through confirms that EY have finished their audit work and they've issued disclaimer opinion for the last 2 years. So the one that we're following, because we're following a disclaimer, that means that in a normal audit you would rely on the opening balances for the previous period, and when the accounts come through, all the numbers in the accounts is actually only one column in each of the core statements that we're auditing. The other columns audited previously, and the impact of how financial accounting works, particularly on the balance sheet, is that the last year's balance sheet, the debtors and creditors all get released into the year's position, that they are starting opening position for your I&E account. So the logical impact of that, unfortunately, means that the current year audited statements, without doing lots and lots of extra work, which we'll get into in a second, we won't be able to get comfortable with the comparative numbers, the opening balances, and therefore all the transactional data in your current year I&E account. And that's where we've ended up. That's where every local authority audit that's following a disclaimer will end up. So unfortunately, the impact of that, i.e. most of the numbers in the accounts we can't get comfortable with, we also have to issue a disclaimer audit opinion. However, what I'd hope you'd see from the detail of our report and the nature of what's in the actual audit report itself means that our disclaimer is one that's saying we're disclaiming the opinion because there's so many numbers we can't get comfortable with. However, we have done a lot of detailed work over aspects of the financial accounts to allow us to get back on that journey to get into an unmodified audit opinion in 2 or 3 years' time. And so the paper just before, and in some of the pages within our report, it explains the whole process that we're going through. So we're aiming so that in 2 or 3 years' time we can issue a modified audit opinion in the way that you would normally expect to get. So unfortunately, the fact that you're getting a disclaimed audit opinion, normally that would mean that something's gone really wrong. But hopefully the report has a lot of narrative explaining that it isn't something that's specific to yourselves, it isn't something that's gone really wrong here, it's just the kind of output and nature of the wider sector. So that's the kind of background I wanted to give, and there's some more detail on page 4 and 5 detailing that. But page 5 is kind of my report, which is page 7 of the second PDF package you're looking at that. I think you're on paper, so it's in the supplementary papers, page 7 I think it is, I'm not sure which page it is of the main paper. So the headline at the top says, our audit and the implications of the statutory facts. So on the left hand side there, that details the key areas that we were flagging as wanting to do audit work. So the areas that have got significant risk within them, or key areas of financial statements that we're saying has a risk of material mistake. And so they're the areas where we focus our work. So payroll costs, income, the core areas of the financial statements. And what we're saying there is that we've been able to get comfortable with the items at the top, so income, expenditure, creditors, staff costs, cash and cash equivalents, the going concern nature of the accounts, and various other elements of the accounts and disclosures. However, we haven't been able to complete a full audit programme of certain aspects, so they are open balances, movements between reserves and therefore the closing position of reserves for the year. That's largely driven by the opening balances containing lots of uncertainty because you haven't had an audit for a few years. Valuation of land and buildings, which I'll come on to in a second, and the pension fund statements, which again I'll come on to in a second. So they are the areas where we're going to pull them out in our audit opinion as saying that we can't get comfortable with those figures. If you look at a different set of fire authority accounts or a different set of local authority accounts, that list will be different. That's purely down to what the auditors have been able to get comfortable with. And the reason we haven't been able to get comfortable largely is because of time. So the previous audit was finished in December. We have been doing our work throughout the summer, but there has been aspects that we haven't been able to get into the detail of until they finish their work. And also, so there's just limited time. We have to issue our opinion by the end of February. A big part of the legislation that's been put in place is to stop a backlog building up again. So we're finishing reporting by the end of February, they're moving on quickly, so we want to be doing the planning in kind of March time to start again for next year's audit. So we want to try and improve the pace in the reporting in terms of where we're up to. So that's the kind of summary of where we're up to. The rest of the paper goes into a bit more detail. Page 6 kind of gives the headline messages on the page that sets out the key kind of findings. So the key significant risks of management override of controls and evaluation of post-retirement benefits. We've been able to complete our audit procedures in regards to both of those significant risks, and we have no matters to report in regards to those things. So that's the positive assurance that the two riskier areas of your accounts, as far as we're concerned, the way in which journals are processed and the way in which the pensions are calculated, the assumptions within that. We've completed the audit work that we want to, and we don't have any concerns to report to you. And there's a few outstanding matters on the right side of page 6, but that's just a timing thing really. Our audit team is still finalising a few things, so we expect to finalise those before we complete. Page 8 onwards there's a detailed slide or two for each of those significant risks, so I won't take you through all of that, but that, if you want to really get into the nitty-gritty of what we've looked at, so the riskier areas, that repeats what we said in the plan, so the things that we were going to do, and then it summarises our findings in the detail that we've undertaken. But I won't go through that now. I'll pause on page 12, that is a slide in regards to the defined benefit pension liability. What that says there is that it points out that the number is really big. So you've got a £407 million liability there that links through to your pensions. That's a very large number. Clearly there's a lot of uncertainty within that. If assumptions are made one way or the other, that number could change a bit. However, what we've done is that we get our pensions experts, our actuaries, to look at the process that's followed by your actuaries to assume the numbers. And basically we've been through all the assumptions that have been used by your actuaries, and they are within the acceptable range that's set by our experts. So there's no kind of weird or odd decisions being made as part of those. So that's the headline message in terms of that. Page 13 goes through some of the specific misstatements that we've identified that have been processed in the financial accounts. I don't really want to flag any of these to you as a particular area of concern. Pulling together a set of accounts is a difficult project, so normally we would find some amendments during an audit, and in particular, as you haven't had a detailed report for a couple of years, I would expect we're finding quite a few this year, because various judgments or assumptions have been made in the past and not really challenged, so we're happy with that. There's one area that hasn't been amended, which is linked through the presentation of how a certain aspect of your pensions accounting has been done. It's a relatively large number, but to be honest, it doesn't really make a difference as to where that's presented and the timing of it. So we're happy for that to be uncorrected. It's below the materiality threshold that would cause a concern to require us to ask you to amend it. It's below the threshold that requires us to ask you to do that. So no further action there. Page 19 gives you a summary of our value for money work. Again, there's some more detailed narrative on the pages following, that goes through our view of the arrangements in place, have the authority to do things such as concerning financial sustainability, the governance and the way in which decisions are made, and improving economy, efficiency and effectiveness, so the effectiveness of the service and kind of operational judgments. We've been through all of that. There's some detailed narrative following it, but the headline message is that we don't have any areas of significant weakness to report to you, so our audit report doesn't flag any concerns. That's in fact a clean VFM conclusion. So that's everything on the audit report. I note that we've also presented there's various appendices that go into a bit more detail of what I spoke about at the start, and some details about audit fee. There's a few recommendations there, but none are flagged as significant. To take any questions on them if you wish. But then, straight after that first report, there's another report that looks very similar. I won't go through that one in detail because it pretty much repeats the messages that I've just said. But what the first report is the report to yourselves in your roles as those charged with governance. That's got all the technical audit language in there. That's the one that goes through all the details that I'm required to do as an auditor. Second report is something that's very specific to audits of local authorities, and the NHS have it as well, in that it's a public report. So that's a report that's required to be put on your website alongside your accounts. That is the report that members of the public will be able to access. The fact that you're reporting in public here means they can see both, but technically you didn't have to happen that way. So that's deliberately written, or tried to be written in plain English, so it's aimed at the public. Some of the narratives, so the VFM narrative is pretty much exactly the same, but the way in which you describe our work in the accounts, there's some extra detail there about fire authorities in general and how things fit together in the international context. So that report's aimed at the public. That is a draft still, but we're going to issue that, and we're still going to tweak that and accept comments from officers right until we kind of publish that at the end of February. But we thought, as it's the meeting we're bringing the first paper to you, that we bring both so you can have a look through. Happy to take any comments on that one as we still haven't finalised that. Right, I'll pause there, I'll stop talking.
Thanks, Richard. I haven't got a page 19, but...
You haven't got page 19?
I'm up to 15. Where are you?
Yeah, you're good.
Is it somewhere? Am I missing it?
I think 15 might be the second report.
It's on the second document that you're looking at.
Look at that one.
Yeah. 17, 18, 19. Yeah, that's missing that one. It's all right. So, Richard, is there anything you think we should do, on the grey bits on the left-hand side, and I see the estimates bit has risen from the previous report as well. Is there anything we should do? I don't mean in this committee now. Do we need to look at it in more depth?
So, the estimates point is, what we're trying to get across there is to basically point out to you that we don't think that there's any kind of weight to that judgment. So the two bits in the middle was saying that it's neutral in terms of the way in which the judgment's been made. So they're not kind of trying to make the number. The people who've got the ability to make to alter the assumptions. So your actuaries can say that the way the assumptions are, how long people are going to live, how much is wages going to rise, that kind of thing. They could tweak one of those assumptions and make that number much bigger or much smaller.
I see.
So what we're saying is that we've looked in the assumptions they've used and we think the approach is neutral. So the movement, in an odd way, I'm not interested in the movement because we can't really control it. The only thing I know about the estimate is that it's wrong because it's an estimate.
Yeah.
So, but is the way in which they've calculated the estimate reasonable? That's what we're trying to look at. And our considered view is that it's neutral, and in particular, because I'm not an actuary, but we employ actuaries. Our actuaries have been through, there's about a dozen judgments they look at, and they kind of track them on a range of, are they being too optimistic or too cautious, and all of yours are within the acceptable range.
Okay, that's great, thank you. Any questions? No, through and on, so we're now on the right one, aren't we? Page 243. We're out there.
So we're on the recommendations.
Yeah. 236, you think? I've got one from here.
On the page, just along item 8.
Okay, let's look at the first recommendation. You're right, we're on 246 then. That's members note the contents and delegate authority to myself and to the 151 officer. Are we agreed? Thank you. There we are. Okay, internal audit report, anything else on that?
An internal audit report, yeah, move on to that one. So the report gives an update on the 24-25 audit plan. So I'll hand over to Andrew to give an update on that. On the plan.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so this is just a progress report on where we are with the current year's audit 2024-25. At the top of page 251 there's a table showing the 6 audits that we've agreed to do this year. The first one is procurement, and that report has been issued and that is included in this report, so I'll be coming to that next. The data protection audit, at the time this report was written, it was at draft stage, it has been issued earlier this week, so that report will be included in the next committee's papers, the next meeting of this committee. Third audit, replacement mobilisation system. That audit, we were about to start it, it's going to be done like a project management audit, but it's been delayed to at the earliest late February because there's a vacancy at the project manager level dealing with the RMS. So we're, until that vacancy is filled with delay in the audit, and as I say, it'll be late February at the earliest, I expect we start that. The fourth one is the Fire Standards Board, National Fire Standard on leading the service. We've agreed the scope on that. We met the team on 18th of September. We're starting a week on Monday. We've got a meeting with John Mills and Daniel Palmer, and that audit is starting a week on Monday. The fifth one, the on-call firefighter payments made through the rostering system or the rota system. We met payroll last week to look at that and get some idea of the value and volume of transactions in the system. So that was last Thursday, 9th of January, and the audit has now just started. So finally, corporate governance, still scoping that one, and I expect that one to be done in March. So those are our 6 audits, and you know, so they're all on track to be done within the financial year. As I said, the first one on that table is procurement, and that the a report on procurement has been issued. So that's the next item in this report, page 253 onwards. So our audit of procurement, we gave a reasonable assurance rating, which is our medium rating. There's 7 recommendations in this report, all were agreed, and actions to address them are included in the report. First, on page 254, just over the page, now the positive findings are set out in paragraph 4.1. So there are positives, the strategies, policies and guidance. There's a procurement database called Intend, which enables planning and compliance with procurement rules. There's e-procurement, which enables e-tendering, and again that ensures compliance with rules. And finally, compliance with the financial regulations. Most tendering does comply with it, but subject to some extent, 3 exceptions which we found, which are included in finding 1. So we've gone to 257, which is where the 7 findings and recommendations start. There's just one of them is priority 1, the rest are priority 2. So finding 1 is the only priority 1 finding, and this is where we found that 3 contracts out of 27 that we looked at weren't competitively procured, and there was no approval not to competitively procure them. The values of those are 39k, 22k and 46k. So there's non-compliance with the fin regs, and possibly a VFM hasn't been improved, value for money hasn't been improved. So the actions to address these, the procurement policy is going to be communicated to staff, and there's going to be future reports to this committee on single source procurements, so it's being monitored better in future. The remaining 6 actions or findings or recommendations are all priority 2. So finding 2 is to publicise the new procurement thresholds before whilst the final financial regulations are being updated, because the thresholds were changed I think about a year ago and they haven't yet been incorporated into the financial regulations, so we're saying to publicise those. Finding 3, contracts over 5,000 should be included in the procurement database. This is for transparency because these are published, but also for visibility to the procurement team so they can manage and control those contracts better. Finding 4, forward planning for expiring contracts could improve, and the action in relation to that is that a pipeline module for the intended database has been procured to enable better monitoring of procurements and contracts and when they need to be re-procured. Finding 5, ensure wider use of e-procurement. So all contracts over 25k should be captured and should use the e-procurement methods. Finding 6, to get signed copies of the contracts on the procurement database. And finding 7, procurement training to be developed. Okay, so that's that report. Have you got any questions on that?
No.
Can I just to add to that, sorry, because the report then goes on to give an update as well on the contract management audit as well that happened last year, because I think Fire Authority tasked Finance and Resources to monitor the progress of that because it was an area where we've got limited assurance. So there is an update in Appendix 2 on that. So that again identifies all the actions that were taken, all the actions that were agreed, and then the item in red that's shown in red on the agenda in the text is the latest action that's being taken. So all of those, everything is progressing in relation to all the actions that were outstanding. One of the key things that action was taken is that we've bolstered the resources that are in the team. So a new contract manager has been established for 18 months, and that's been now filled by an internal member of the team that's left a vacant procurement officer post. So they're currently being recruited too. So obviously once that's happened, we'll have that additional resource properly, fully resourced at that point in the team, and it will mean that those actions can progress at better pace. So that is happening, and obviously there's quite a strong link as well between the contract management audit and the procurement audit as well, because they're very closely linked. So yes, so there is that additional resource that's going in to try and that'll help these actions move forward. One of the key areas is about the training and rolling out the training across the organisation.
Great, thank you. Any questions? No?
When you do the training and people are actually involved in doing the day-to-day job, is it going to be some sort of, I don't know, flow chart, easy guide, how to go? People get so embroiled in the day-to-day activities, don't they?
Yeah.
I guess this is one of the reasons why, perhaps not intentionally, people are not quite doing things as they should be. So will it be nice and clear?
Yeah, that's the intention. They are holding small training sessions with individual managers that are got different responsibilities for different areas, so they can target it specifically to their needs as well. And then obviously there will be training guidance and process notes as well issued as well.
And also, the people will know why it is so important.
Yeah.
Because it's not just telling them telling people what the
why
procedure is,
but
why.
Yeah.
And the potential implications of not following the. So we've got all that in hand then.
Yeah.
Okay. Further questions? We're asked to note that. Agreed? You're agreed. Moving on to item 10, that's exclusion of the public under the, what was it? Sorry?
Do you want to just read that out? Sorry.
Yeah. consider excluding the public from the meeting during consideration of the remaining items in accordance with Section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972 under Schedule 12A, Part 1, on the basis that having regard to all circumstances, the public interest in maintaining an exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing that information. I'll move that. Seconded. Agreed. Thank you.